Okay, so we're going through October-November 2019 question paper 13, just like the other ones. A lot of questions are duplicated from question paper 11, so I'll circle the correct answers for these questions, and you can go directly to the question paper 11 video, October-November 2019, to see the full explanations for these if you still don't understand them fully. So there's 10 questions duplicated in total. Okay, and then we'll start from question 29. So, a trade union succeeds in raising the wages in an industry above the equilibrium wage. How would the demand and the supply of labour change? So, this would be our equilibrium wage beforehand, right? Where demand would equal to supply. Therefore, if they raise the wage rate above the equilibrium, we can see what happens if we draw the diagram, is that we're going to have a contraction in demand and we're going to have an extension in supply. Therefore, what's going to happen is that we can see the demand will fall from here to Q1, and the supply will extend from Q to Q2. So the quantity of labour supplied will rise and the quantity of labour demanded will fall. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if the wages go up, it now becomes more expensive for the employer. And remember, the employer in the wage rate market is determined by the demand. So the employer is going to demand less labour as it now becomes more expensive. And more labour is going to be supplied as the trade union will increase their wages, which means more people are going to want to work because they will get higher wages than they used to get. Okay, 28. A newspaper headline stated that free trade helps the world's poorest people. Why might this be correct? Okay, so why is it going to help the poorest people or reduce income inequality is what we have to think about. So if employment is focused in high-tech industries, that's not going to help the world's poorest people, is it? They're not going to get those jobs in the high-tech industries because they've got low levels of skill. Environmental disasters will be avoided. Well, that's just not true in either case. Just because we have free trade doesn't mean that we're going to avoid environmental disasters. Free trade reduces competitiveness for domestic firms. Again, under no circumstances is that going to affect or help the world's poorest people. Okay, if the demand goes down for the domestic firms, it's going to become harder, if that was true, it's going to become harder for the world's poorest people to be able to access goods and services because they may have to import them instead. Whereas if the cost of living goes down, that will help the world's poorest people because it now becomes cheaper for them to live. So that will help to reduce the inequality. 24. Which change as a percentage of GDP would be unlikely to be found in a country as it develops? So we discussed this in QP12. That means that as the country starts to get richer, which change as a percentage of GDP is unlikely to happen? So, increase in average incomes, yes, that is likely to happen. And a decrease in unemployment, yes, that is likely to happen as well as a country becomes richer. Increase in manufacturing production, yes. And an increase in shipping services, yes, we're likely to export. Increase in subsistence farming, that is unlikely to happen. Okay, so that's therefore going to be our correct answer. Subsistence farming, remember, this is the type of farming that takes place where people are producing agricultural products for their own use. So they're producing their own rice, their own potatoes, etc. That's more likely to happen in a developing economy or in a poorer country. And financial services are also not likely to decrease, they're likely to increase. Whereas the last one, export of agricultural products goes up. That's true as we get richer and we have more tourism. Decrease in the export of agricultural products is likely to happen because we will switch from the agriculture to the secondary and the tertiary sectors instead as we become more developed. (23) is one of these easy questions where we just have to read the graph. So what can we conclude about average prices? They fell throughout the period. No, we can't conclude that because we can see that the inflation rate in all of these years here is positive, right? Which means that every year it's becoming slightly more expensive than it was in the previous year. Peaked in the year 2000, that's not true. Remember, inflation rate, it was 8% in the year 2000, but in 2000 and let's say this is 2001 for example, it's 7% higher in 2001 than it was in 2000. So it gradually increases. They rose every year, yes, that's true, because we can see that the inflation rate is positive in every year, which means it's getting more expensive in every year. And therefore they're not lower in 2014 than they were in 2010. It would be 2% higher, plus 2013, plus 2012, plus 2011. So maybe 10, 12, 13% higher than it would have been in 2010. 22, you need to read this question carefully. What type of unemployment is the result of a permanent fall in the demand for the products of an industry? That would be structural unemployment. Okay, seasonal unemployment, it's not that one. Seasonal unemployment is a type of frictional unemployment, and that type is a short-term type of unemployment where people are in between jobs. So it's not due to a reduction in the demand. It might be due to, for example, the seasonal element, which is where you might have particular areas like Thailand where people will have a lot of jobs during the high season for tourism, and during the low season for tourism there's not as much jobs available. It's not a permanent fall in demand, it's a seasonal fall. And cyclical unemployment arises as a result of a lack of aggregate demand. Okay, but we're told in this case, remember, aggregate demand affects the whole economy, but in this case we're told that it's a permanent fall in a particular industry, which tells us that it would be structural unemployment. Remember, structural can be linked to regional unemployment is a type of structural, and so is technological unemployment, where technology improves and advances beyond the capabilities of what labour can do. So we replace the labour. Regional is this one, where we have a permanent fall in the demand for a product of an industry. We may have a particular industry, let's say it's coal mining, focused in a particular region, so it will heavily affect the unemployment in that area. 21. What indicator would be included in HDI? Very simple. Just look at your QP12 and QP11 video. That's years spent in education. It doesn't include the unemployment rate, it doesn't include the employment per 1,000 people, and it doesn't include the literacy rate either. It does include the years that are spent in education, and it also includes healthcare and real GDP per head. What is most likely as a result of a sustained increase in GDP? Okay, so if we have a continual increase in GDP, we won't have a decrease in living standards, we will have an increase in living standards. A decrease in the budget surplus, an increase in tax revenues, or an increase in employment. So these ones, they may happen. We may have an increase in tax revenues because as real GDP continues to increase, we may have more people working, more income, therefore more tax. We definitely won't have an increase in unemployment. We should have a decrease in unemployment as more people get jobs because our output is rising. Remember that real GDP here, that is our level of output. So it's saying that our output is going up. If we're producing more, then we need more people to fill the jobs, which means our unemployment will go down. So in this case, the correct answer is an increase in tax revenue, and that's because real GDP going up or output going up means more people in jobs, which means that income will also go up. And more income means we collect more in tax revenue. A decrease in the budget surplus, that is possible for it to happen, but is not the most likely effect. Remember, a decrease in the budget surplus means that tax revenue, which we know goes up, would have to come down, and government expenditure would have to go up. So therefore, that is not as likely to happen as if we know that our tax revenue is going to increase. Government uses monetary policy and reduces the interest rate. What might happen? So to remember here, this is a expansionary monetary policy, and that is designed to increase our AD to the right, which from the previous question will also be affected by an increase in output, an increase in income, a decrease in unemployment, etc. So a decrease in the rate of inflation, that's unlikely to happen because we know that AD is going to go right, so inflation is actually likely to happen. Increase in the level of investment, increase in the level of savings, so savings is unlikely to increase, and that's because consumer expenditure, which is C, is a component of AD, and we know that AD is going to increase, so we'll spend more and then we may possibly save less, also because the interest rate has gone down, which means that we'll borrow more and we'll save less because we're getting a smaller return on our savings with our bank accounts. Increase in unemployment, that's incorrect. Unemployment is likely to go down, which is what we discussed in the previous question when real GDP goes up. But we are likely to have an increase in the level of investment. Investment, like we said, is linked to the interest rate. When the interest rate goes down, it becomes easier to borrow money because we've got to pay back less. So we'll borrow more and we'll use that money for investment, and we'll save less, and therefore we'll spend more. Okay, table shows tax paid at different incomes level in an economy. What description of the tax system is correct? So the first thing is to remember progressive equals as you earn more, you pay a higher percentage in tax. Regressive is where, as you earn more, you pay a smaller percentage in tax. And proportional is irregardless of your income. So it doesn't matter if you're earning a large amount or a small amount. You pay the same percentage in tax. Okay, we can see straight away it's not proportional because the tax percentages are changing here, right? So first of all, we calculate at the lowest level of income. Tax paid divided by the income level will give us a 10% tax rate. For the second one, tax paid by the income level will give us a 20% tax rate. So we can see that it's increasing, so it's progressive for now. 25%, 5 divided into 20, and then 20%. Okay, so what we can see is that in the first three bands here, 10, 15 to 25, it is progressive, and then it becomes regressive because as we earn 30,000, we're then paying a smaller percentage of tax than we were paying when we earned 20,000. So progressive then regressive will be our correct answer here. Okay, a government uses a mixture of fiscal policy measures and supply side policy measures to stimulate growth in an economy. What combination of policy measures will achieve this? So we're going to be using expansionary fiscal policies if we're stimulating growth because we want to move AD to the right. So what we're going to be looking for our fiscal policy is we're going to be looking for the following. Either a decrease in the tax rates or an increase in government expenditure. Okay, so let's have a look at these. Interest rates here, for example, that is not a fiscal policy, that is a monetary policy. Increasing direct tax, that's not going to stimulate AD because these policies here, we know that we're looking to move AD to the right. Okay, whereas if we increase the taxes, that's the opposite effect that's noted in our box. So that will move AD to the left, and it's not going to stimulate growth. It's going to do the opposite. It's going to reduce the growth. Increasing government investment or increasing government expenditure. We can see here very simply which one is the method of fiscal policy. That's increasing government expenditure, which tells us, even without knowing our supply side policy measures, which we should know, that increasing skills training will be the supply side policy measure because we've determined the other three fiscal policy measures are incorrect. Okay, 16. A government decides to increase tax revenues from consumer expenditure. What tax will it increase? So if we're increasing tax revenues from government expenditure, we're going to be taxing goods and services, which means that we're going to be using indirect taxes. Okay, so straightforward, a debt duty is not a tax on consumer expenditure. A capital gains tax is not a tax on consumer expenditure. It's a tax on the profit that is made from investments. A profit tax is not an indirect tax, it is a direct tax. So it's a tax on company profits, not on consumer expenditure. But VAT is. So VAT is an indirect tax, and it is also a tax on consumer expenditure of certain types of goods or services. When we go to a restaurant, VAT is the thing that's added to our bill in a restaurant. So that money is paid by the restaurant to the government for the service of going to eat out in a restaurant. Okay, 13. We just need to know our types of mergers for these questions. Really, it's very simple. If the companies in this case, they're doing the same thing. So a large UK company is acquiring a rival. We know they're doing the same thing. That makes them horizontal, right? Because they're both doing the same thing. They're on the same line, right? So here we'll have the UK company, and here we'll have the US company. Remember, the vertical types are movements between the sectors. So at the start, you're going to have the primary sector, right? Which may be the one that's extracting and collecting the raw materials, that company. Then you'll have the secondary sector, which is maybe these companies here who are manufacturing medicine. And then you'll have the tertiary sector, which is the companies that are selling that medicine. So the vertical types of integration, they're where we're moving along the supply chain. But the horizontal is where the two companies are doing the same thing and we're taking over our competitors. So the UK company goes to take over this US company, which is doing the exact same thing. They're manufacturing the medicine. So that makes it horizontal integration. Okay, this is an unusual question, 12. A public limited company has shares which are freely transferable on the stock exchange. Okay, they're not owned by the government. A public limited company is still a private company, right? They're not under government control. They're called public because the public can buy their shares and they can take an ownership in that company. They're not owned by the workers and they're not restricted in their transferability. Remember, the main difference between public versus private company. Public limited company can sell shares to anybody. But a private limited company, well, they're both still private companies, they're just different types. They can only sell shares to family and friends, generally. Okay, so that's the main difference between those two. Okay, 9. Now we've done this question in class before. Which organizations can directly fund the growth of firms? So the commercial banks, they can, because they give loans to companies and to people. And so can the government, because the government are going to provide subsidies, etc. to firms, and they may provide grants or advice for new companies also. But the central bank cannot. The central bank doesn't give loans to regular firms or people. They are just there to stop if the commercial bank has a liquidity crisis to bail them out. Okay, what is most likely to increase the occupational mobility of labour? So remember, increasing the occupational mobility of labour, what does that mean? That means making it easier for people to change jobs. Right? So when we look at these, which one is going to make it easier for people to change jobs? Now, building more houses, what that's going to do is that's going to increase the geographical mobility, which is the ability to move between locations. Because they build more houses, it becomes easier to get a house in a certain area. If they increase spending on training schemes, that will allow people to switch jobs more easily because it is going to improve their level of skills. And if they have more skills, they can change jobs easier. Increased total government spending has nothing to do with it. It has to be directed towards making it easier for people to change jobs. And increasing the information on job availability. Same thing, that's unlikely to make it easier for people to change jobs. It may make the geographical mobility easier, because it may make them have more information about where jobs are in certain areas, which means that they can change. But their occupational mobility is linked to their skills, their education, and their experience. Question 7. PED measures the responsiveness of demand to a change in price. It can differ for different goods. For which good is the PED most elastic according to the table? So remember, the one that is most elastic is the value that's the highest when we calculate it. And elastic is going to be bigger than 1.00. Inelastic, smaller than 1.00. And our formula is going to be the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. Okay, so very simply we just divide these into each other. So for the first one, 6 divided into 5, that's going to give us 1.2. 5.5 divided by 5 is going to give us 1.1. 5 into 5 will give us 1.0, and 3 into 5 will give us 0.6. So we can see that butter has the most elastic PED because the value is the highest, higher than all the other values here. Okay, there's been a movement upwards along a supply curve, right? So when we get these questions, we have to draw our demand and our supply diagram. A movement upwards along a supply curve tells us that there has been an extension in supply, right? So what we have to do is we have to figure out what would cause an extension in supply or a movement upwards along the supply curve. And that would be a shift to the right in demand. Okay, so we can see here, here's the movement upwards along the supply curve. So we're looking for a reason why demand would have shifted to the right. So consumer incomes fall, that would make demand shift to the left, which would cause a movement downwards on the supply curve. New technology has made the product cheaper to produce. That would shift the supply curve to the right, so it would not cause a movement on the supply curve, it would shift it. Government has imposed a tax on a product. That would make the supply curve shift to the left. So again, it would not be a movement, it would be a shift. But if the price of a substitute is increased, then less people will buy the substitute and more people will buy our product, so the demand will shift to the right. Question 5. In a private market system, certain goods and services would not be available unless the government intervenes. What does this identify in a private market? Okay, very simple. It identifies market failure. What they're talking about here is the provision of public goods, right? And the fact that public goods are not provided because, just like we've talked about from the other papers in this same series, because they can't make any profit from them, so that's private companies, because they can't make any profit, they will not provide them, which means the government will have to step in and provide them. Nothing to do with market distribution, nothing to do with market equilibrium, and nothing to do with market structure. Okay, country X provides computers to help teachers in the classroom. How would this technology increase the economic potential of country X? Okay, so they're providing computers to help teachers in the classroom. It's how is it going to affect the amount of land required for education? It's not. They still need the same amount of land. They're just going to put computers in the classroom. It doesn't remove the need for teachers. It is there to help teachers, not to replace them. We're told that in the question. And it doesn't require more teachers to do the same work. We're probably over the long term going to need less teachers. Or even the same teachers, we're just having the computers to help. But it will improve the quality of human resources, and that's how it increases the economic potential. And last one, what describes a finite resource? Remember, finite resource means that the resource is limited. Therefore, the resource does not renew itself because it is limited. Nothing to do with the supply of the resource greater than demand. Nothing to do with opportunity cost, and nothing to do with unlimited supply. You just have to know the definition of a finite resource, and then you'll be able to get that one.